Welcome to Fantasy Football Today Dynasty. I am your host, Heath Cummings, joined today by my good friend, Jacob Gibbs. And get excited. It is Puka Nacua Day. You can see the smile on Jacob's face. No one's more excited about this than he is.
Yeah, man. So good to be Puka Nacua Day. Like, wow. I was really excited for him all offseason, obviously, and now we're actually here, and it's still a little surreal.
Well, I've had a number of tweets that have come in before I even mentioned that that's like going to be kind of the highlight of what we talk about. And we'll get to it in just a minute. Of course, we've got the big Nick Chubb news. That's what we'll talk about first. We've got some deep waiver wire ads for you a little later in the show. We'll talk about some dynasty risers and fallers and a couple of wide receiver duos on the same team that I have ranked very close to each other and kind of struggle with who I prefer. We'll get Jacob's definitive answer on that. But first, we have to start with the bad news. An absolutely gruesome injury to Nick Chubb last night. Obviously, first, we hope he's okay. And hopefully he recovers and we get to see him play football. He's been arguably the best runner in the NFL since he entered the league. And now turning 28 in another month or two, season ending, some sort of surgery coming, Jacob. I guess let's start with the angle of that like people might be actionable. What do you think this backfield looks like without Chubb?
It was pretty much all Jerome Ford on Monday night, and I think that they really like Jerome Ford. All summer they had the opportunity to go get someone else. They let Kareem walk, Kareem Hunt. There were plenty of running backs they could have signed, and Jerome Ford was injured leading up all through preseason and everything, and they didn't. The only acquisition they made was going and getting Pierre Strong for really cheap. And I think that they're pretty committed to him, and so I'm pretty excited about him. I liked him as a prospect. I think he profiles pretty strongly, and obviously we saw the big play potential last night. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see if they sign somebody.
Right. I did see some suggestions they might be in the Cam Akers market.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have much reason to think Cam Akers is better than Jerome Ford right now. I've seen a lot of people speculating on Kareem Hunt, obviously, but they already chose Jerome Ford over Kareem Hunt once this season. So I am more working under the assumption that it might be like a 60-30, maybe like what it's been with Chubb and Hunt in the past, with Ford in that Chubb role, except maybe catching more passes. Probably a borderline number 2. Listen, we've had a lot of backup running backs who have disappointed us already in the first 2 weeks of the NFL season. So there's some concern there, but do you view Ford more as someone who might get this job and then become a starting running back for a 3 or 4 year stretch? Or do you think this is he's like a patchwork guy for 2023?
Probably a patchwork guy. He doesn't necessarily profile as a 3-down guy. He's a 5th-round pick. So he's exciting. He's got the opportunity here. I do think he's got some juice, but yeah, I wouldn't go overboard with it.
So when J.K. Dobbins tore his Achilles, I guess it was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, somebody had him on their roster and they basically sent out a blast. They were tilting. He said, first person to offer me a 4th-round pick for J.K. Dobbins, you can have him. And so I sent a 4th-round pick. Put him on the IR. We'll see if he's able to play football again. But Chubb, he's been healthy except for that injury in college. Now, this is a pretty major knee injury. Like I said, he'll turn 28 before this year turns to 2024. Do you have any hope on, like, this is the kind of guy, and I tweeted about it earlier, said I had stashed Jerome Ford just for this moment. I am tanking this year. Somebody offered, I put him on the block as soon as this happened last night. Somebody offered me Nick Chubb for him in a dynasty league. I don't know that I want to take that.
That's really interesting. I think I prefer the long-term outlook for Chubb still. It's tough. We don't know exactly what he's going to be when he gets back, but I don't think Nick Chubb is somebody whose ability is necessarily predicated on his athleticism. I think he could still be a really good running back, even if he doesn't have quite as much juice. I think fundamentally he's one of the best running backs we've ever seen. I want to believe. That is really interesting comparing the two.
Yeah, well, yeah, because like obviously if you're factoring in this year, Ford gets a big boost from the fact that you could actually use him. But just looking at it from next year forward, I just don't know. And I think the other thing is, like, obviously that relationship with Chubb and the Browns seems pretty special. And so I would assume they will get it worked out. But I believe he has a $4 million dead cap hit after this year, and he has like a $15 million contract next year. So he's going to be in that Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook conversation next offseason of, does he take the pay cut to stay on the Browns? Because they're not paying him what his current contract would call for.
Yeah. And for everything I just said about him as a player, like, it's really hard for aging running backs to remain relevant if they don't catch passes and stay on the field on passing downs. Yeah.
Any interest? We'll talk about some deeper waiver wire guys, and Pierre Strong's on that list. Any interest in adding Strong this week in dynasty leagues? Just not, obviously you're not putting a big fab bid out there, but is he a guy you want to have on the roster in case something happens to Ford now?
Yeah, similarly to Ford, Strong was somebody that I've been stashing. You know, you like to stash these backup running backs that could be something. And then he got traded. We actually had a couple dynasty teams with both of them, and he got traded to Cleveland, and I ended up dropping him in a few spots to clear space, which is frustrating now. I think he's worth an ad for sure. I think we could see him working more as he gets more familiar with the system.
We will put him on the list. Now, that was not the happiest way, obviously, to start the show, but it's Puka Nacua time, and Thomas has a nice transition here for us.
He had the highest yard per route run rate of any player in this class. In fact, among players who qualified, who have at least 500 routes run in their career, his yard per route run rate is higher than anyone other than Jalen Waddle among receivers taken in the first 5 rounds over the last 5 years. So higher than T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, C.D. Lamb, Puka Nacua. So maybe a name to know because the Rams really, I mean, after Cooper Kupp, we really have no idea who's going to get the targets. Nice tank top.
That was from May on Fantasy Football Today. I have show notes, and I didn't go back and pull the show. On this show, Fantasy Football Today Dynasty, we were talking in June with Dwayne McFarland about Puka Nacua and being a dynasty buy and go get him. So this is a guy that you've been talking about basically since the draft. He's been talked about a lot on this show. And I love this time of year because it's the time you can legitimately take a side here. What he's done in the first 2 weeks of the season, earning 30 targets and second in the NFL in receiving yards. Even you didn't think that was going to happen, even if Cooper Kupp was out. But now we've got this strange thing, and I posted a dynasty poll this morning. Puka Nacua, Jahan Dotson, or Christian Watson. Puka's got about 50% of the vote, just mopping the floor with those guys. I don't know how really to rank this guy. And so you're going to help me with that. I've got 3 questions. We always do the 3 questions for Jacob Gibbs, 3 questions for Chris Towers. We got 3 questions about Puka Nacua. And these are kind of the 3 things that go into my dynasty rankings. And then I'm going to tell you when we're done where I had them, and you tell me if I'm crazy. Rest of season projections for Puka Nacua, and give me, and you don't have to give me like a number. Where is he wide receiver wise? If Cooper Kupp comes back week 5 and everything's fine, or if Cooper Kupp doesn't ever really become Cooper Kupp again this year.
If Kupp doesn't come back and isn't fine, I think Nacua is legitimately like top 20 fantasy receiver is totally realistic. I've got him at wide receiver 15 this week. He can fill so many roles, and he's clearly the guy. Like, and the role that he's getting with the first read targets and everything else, the percentage of everything he's getting, he's counted for 45% of the receiving yards while he's been on the field. It's just absurd. Like, that's wide receiver 1 stuff. When Kupp is back, Dan and I have talked about this quite a bit. Dan Schneier on Beyond the Box Score. I still think he can play a really relevant role. Like, he's somebody we saw used in a lot of different ways creatively in college. He can be used as a rusher. The Rams have gotten him involved that way a little bit so far. He can work down the field in the intermediary, and then, like we saw last week, he can do kind of the Cooper Kupp stuff and really just kill zones. So I think he's going to be the starting flanker when Kupp is back and still be pretty involved.
So you think wide receiver, you said top 20 without Kupp, 36-ish with Kupp?
I think that's about right. Yeah. I mean, like, that is contingent on the Rams continuing to look good offensively, Stafford continuing to be healthy. Like, if everything's functioning well and Kupp is back, I think he still could be relevant.
Okay, so I've got a number that I assign for a player's long-term dynasty upside. It's not completely tethered to this year. It's just like in the next 3 years, what's this guy's reasonable upside? Let's say 80th percentile.
Okay.
You don't have to give me a number because you don't know what my scale is, but give me a few guys who you think Nacua's upside matches up pretty well to over the next 3 years. But things go right.
Right. Jaden Reed is somebody who and we're definitely going to talk about today. I think that they're comparable. I want to think of some guys who aren't rookies.
Yeah, not rookies, preferably.
Right, yeah. I think maybe Elijah Moore is a decent comparison. Somebody like that can fill a lot of different roles and has shown some encouraging data points so far, but it's a small sample size. Jahan Dotson. Honestly, I think the results in that poll that you posted are absolutely absurd, and I'm about as big of a Puka Nacua truther as you'll find. But people are so quick to just like give up on Jahan Dotson, and it's like, this guy is really, really good. He's not in a situation that's necessarily very conducive to fantasy success right now, but don't sleep on Jahan Dotson. We had Matt Harmon on Beyond the Box Score this summer. He's another guy who likes Puka Nacua as well, and he just is enamored with Jahan Dotson and what he's seen from him. He's just so good at evaluating wide receivers and finding Brandon Ayuk is the latest guy who's just like absolutely broken out and is much better than people realize and has been for years. So yeah, I think Dotson I would rather have than Nacua.
What about Christian Watson? Because he was the other guy in the poll.
Watson's who I voted for. I think the upside for Watson is like way higher than anything you're getting from Nacua. And I love Nacua, but yeah.
It's really hard for me. And this is, I think, a good talking point right now. Like, I think there's people out there that see a rookie earns 30 targets in his first 2 NFL games and hears this player has a lot more upside. And they're like, how is that possible? How can you have and that's the thing is like, we're talking about reasonable upside, not 99% outcomes for all these guys. And this obviously has been for Nacua so far. Maybe even we didn't even think it was on the chart, but like, it's trying to figure out what his upside is based on this type of starts.
The framework, the framework and the offensive environment that he's operating within right now is literally like perfect for just producing target volume. Like the Rams have had a ton of plays. Matthew Stafford feeds his wide receiver one. We've seen this with so many different guys. Look what happened to Kenny Galladay as soon as he got not attached to Matthew Stafford, and just in terms of volume. Like I love Nacua, but yeah, I don't think we should go overboard with it here. I think Michael Pittman is maybe another good comparison from a profile standpoint, like somebody who within the right system can be a fantasy wide receiver one and is legitimately a good player, can be used in a lot of different ways, but I don't think has the upside to push into like the top 10, top 12.
And then do you think he's helped his floor case at all in these first 2 weeks, or do you still think there's a pretty low floor over the next 3 years for Nacua?
I think the only reason to be concerned about the floor is, one, we haven't been able to see him stay healthy at any point and like actually put together a full season, even at the college level. And then 2, it's just a small sample size. But those are both, just things you have to bake in terms of risk. In terms of what we've seen from him as a player and the role that he fills, I think there's really no floor concerns.
I lied. I said 3 questions, but we're gonna keep going on Puka Nacua because it does kind of sound like you're open to the idea that the best course of action based on everybody else's value of him in reaction to the last 2 weeks is to sell Puka in Dynasty.
I am in some places. I don't think you want to like go out of your way to sell him, but I think it's reasonable to hear people out if people come looking to trade for him. Like, absolutely, I would engage in that.
2024 first?
I don't think so, unless it's a pick that you think has a chance to turn to Marvin Harrison or something. Because, like, yeah, if Puka Nacua is as good as Christian Watson or Jahan Dotson, like, I think that's more valuable than that at first.
Right. Well, and I think that's the interesting thing is comparing him not just to the wide receivers in this class, but the wide receivers to the last class. I'm just going to ask you one more because I know you're not quite as high on the put him in the Jahan Dotson, Christian Watson conversation. So what if the poll was a little different? And I know I didn't do this poll on Twitter because Puka would win 90%. But if it was George Pickens, Puka Nacua, and Quentin Johnston,
that would be Nacua for me. I've got pretty serious concerns with both of those guys. Although it was really exciting when we saw from Pickens last night.
Right. We're going to talk about that more. And you mentioned the first read looks for Pickens. You don't have that information yet. We'll have that tomorrow, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be noticeably different. The thing I hesitate with Pickens is how much do we value that spike in first read target share when the number one is gone?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a grain of salt they have to take with everything we saw last night, but the big point is that he did it at all. We literally haven't seen him be able to do that, and we haven't. But like so much of that, I think you can assign to the role that he's playing in Pittsburgh. He ran a go route 39% of the time last year. The next highest was 30%. Over 50% of his routes were go, corner, or post routes. You just don't get targets on those routes. Those routes, the average target per route run rate is 12%. That's so low. It's just been an impossible role for him to win in and to draw targets in. And so, like, if we see him used as a wide receiver one, that at least leaves the upside that's within his player profile, and he's not just Marquez Valdes-Scantling.
I'm glad that he's not just Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I do think he is still Gabe Davis with a worse quarterback, but that we'll find out more about that moving forward with Deontay Johnson now on the IR. We're going to get at least 3 more weeks of George Pickens as we would expect to be this team's wide receiver one. Another piece of news here before we just jump into the waiver wire. David Montgomery, I guess it's not technically news, but he basically came out and said that he thought he needed 2 to 3 weeks to let his quad thigh bruise heal. They've already added Bam Knight off the practice squad. So it's Jahmyr Gibbs, it's Craig Reynolds, it's Bam Knight. Do you think that we're going to see Jahmyr Gibbs actually play like lead running back here? Or do you think who has more carries in the next 2 games, Craig Reynolds plus Bam Knight or Jahmyr Gibbs?
Reynolds and Bam Knight. I hate it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the answer.
I think this is opening the door. If we get an underwhelming Jahmyr Gibbs performance in week 3 to really go by lower than where he was. I think if like with Montgomery being out of the picture, if it's a single digit carry game from Gibbs, and maybe he doesn't have quite as many forced targets as he had last week, I do think that we're going to see just a little bit of panic creeping in.
Yeah, no, I think that is a really good point. I brought him up as a buy. This wasn't specific to Dynasty, but after week 2, just because of that very thing, we saw him kind of fill in, but not really fill the full role, and not do particularly well in week 2. And so that is in people's minds. And then if we see this similar thing in week 3, I think people might panic, because he's so small that there is a potential that he's like CJ Spiller or something.
Right.
And if you get somebody worrying about that, I think that's interesting.
It would be something if the Lions took CJ Spiller at 12th overall. With the way that team is set up for success and the way that division looks like it could be theirs for the taking this year, that would be that'd be something. We're going to take a short break, then we're going to get to the waiver wire, and maybe we'll be adding Craig Reynolds. Okay, so we'll talk about this. So the feedback I got from last week was mostly that we were in just about the right range. So what we're going to try to do, Jacob, with these waiver wire guys is look for guys who are rostered in less than 10% of leagues. We will tell you if somebody's in 25, 30% of leagues because we think that they should be 100%. And obviously Jerome Ford is that guy this week, 27% rostered in CBS leagues, probably rostered in most 12-team dynasty leagues, probably not in a lot of 10-team dynasty leagues. If you see him on your waiver wire and you're not used to finding starter production, is this a guy, if you're a contender, that's worth just 90% of the fab?
I think so. No.
A much better situation than what we've seen the last couple of weeks from like what Joshua Kelly just gave us, right?
Yeah. I think that was mostly matchup based for Kelly. So just don't feel too bad if you did spend a lot of fab on him. I think it made sense. With Ford, it's just like the role could be huge. It's totally realistic that like he's the guy. They don't sign anyone that's within the range of outcomes, and he plays like 60% of the snaps or something.
Right.
And if he's doing that, he's a top 15 or 20 fantasy running back right now. And if you get that kind of season from him at, how old is he, 24? Like that's suddenly somebody who's really pretty valuable for Dynasty.
Well, and especially like, good gosh, we knew coming into this year that there was a changing of the guard happening at running back. I didn't expect half the top 12 to get hurt in the first 2 weeks of the season. It's been an absolute, go good luck finding 12 running backs that you feel really good ranking as an RB1 this week. We should all just do a show where we make fun of the guys we have ranked at 10 through 12 because it's an absolute disaster at running back. Anybody you can find with a role has some appeal. Guys under 10% now. We've got Pierre Strong. We've got Jaleel McLaughlin, who only saw one touch, but it was a touchdown. And I don't know that they're real enamored with Samaje Perine. I wouldn't be surprised if McLaughlin's touches grow over the coming weeks. You gave Eric Gray and Zach Evans as options. I'm going to throw Craig Reynolds into that and Bam Knight into that mix.
Sure.
Like these are the guys who might actually be on the waiver wire in a deeper league.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference? Are you happy with just putting $1 or $2 out there for all of them and see which one you get?
Yeah, I think of the bunch, the most hypothetical upside belongs with Zach Evans. I actually liked him quite a bit as a prospect. He's somebody who was brought up on that Puka Nacua show in the summer. The Rams don't seem particularly into him, which
I
is
think they
weird.
played Ronnie Rivers ahead of him this week, I believe.
But they didn't give him any touches. He was just a special teams guy. And so I think that's kind of interesting sometimes when that happens, because like that leaves open the possibility that if he is able to get on the active roster, he would be ahead of Ronnie Rivers in getting the touches.
Yeah.
None of the other guys really stand out to me.
So Zach Evans I'm adding him to my bench, and he has the most hypothetical long-term upside. Mm-hmm. But we have a lot of guys who have lost Barkley and Chubb and have Taylor sitting on the pup. And like, I got to find somebody to put into my RB2 spot this week. And as gross as these names are, I think if I'm betting on one, it's probably Craig Reynolds this week.
Yeah, I think you're right. They've given him opportunities in the past when they do, and he's performed reasonably well. I think they like him. They've kept him around for 3 years now or something. So
right. He can absolutely fill Jamal Williams' 2022 shoes and handle the ball 16 times for 60 yards. And
he runs hard. I like Craig Reynolds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think at this stage of their career, and that's another guy who went down on Monday night, Jamal Williams. Yeah. I don't have a great deal of confidence that I didn't get the insinuation that Kendre Miller's close. Did you? I know he got some practices in last week, but it wasn't ever like, oh, he might go. Another guy on this list might be Tony Jones if you're just looking for 1 week.
Yeah, that's a good call. I forgot about Tony Jones, but yeah, of course, 2 touchdowns went to him last night, helping absolutely nobody. He could see some work.
So at wide receiver, I've got one guy I actually want to add, and then some lower rostered guys as well. Josh Reynolds is still just rostered in 21% of leagues. And like if it's 21% with a rookie, you assume that guy is owned in all dynasty leagues. But 21% for a guy that's 27, 28 years old, Reynolds might still be available. I hear some people saying, well, he's going to be good for at least another month until Jameson Williams comes back. I kind of think he's probably going to be better than Jameson Williams when Jameson Williams comes back, with that connection to Goff and just the little time that Williams has had in this system. Do you think Josh Reynolds can be a decent flex option for a majority of the rest of the year?
Yeah, I don't think he's anything special as a player, but they need somebody to stretch the field. I wish they would like make a move and get Mike Evans or something like that, because it's kind of rough watching their offense at times. But yeah, I think he is decently fantasy viable at this point.
He is one of those guys, and it's kind of like we have this conversation with running backs a lot. Jameson Williams, much better at stretching the field once he's active because he's a lot faster and he can do some really special things. But Josh Reynolds is going to go to the place where Jared Goff thinks he's going to be, because they've played together for like 7 years. So I think Reynolds is probably going to have some sort of role. 3 other guys that were 11% rostered or less, all veterans. Robert Woods doesn't appear to be going anywhere, at least his targets don't. Yeah. We'll see if CJ Stroud keeps throwing it 40 times per game, but he's only 11% rostered. Chase Claypool emerged after almost getting benched, and Darnell Mooney hurt his knee. 8 targets for Claypool last week. And then I kind of think Devontae Parker's probably the wide receiver 1 for the Patriots until he gets hurt again.
He's definitely wide receiver 1. He didn't come off the field in his first game back, which is nuts. Immediately, Kendrick Bourne's snap rate fell to 50%. Yeah, I think Devontae Parker is worth an add if you need somebody right now. Who are the
We
other two? I'm
we just
blanking.
wish Robert Woods. I mean, I
Right.
love Robert Woods, and he's had a great career, and he was a fantastic value for a couple of years. I don't mean anything negative towards Robert Woods, but maybe somebody could trade for him because I just want all the targets to go to Nico and Tank Dell.
I kind of think that they will. I don't know. I've been really surprised at how involved Robert Woods has been, and I kind of do think those guys are going to take over. Tank, dude, what we saw from Tank this week was really exciting.
Absolutely, I absolutely loved it. It's a little bit sad that it took Noah Brown going on the IR for it to happen, but yeah, I think if Tank Dell can stay healthy, he's going to be a force. Couple of quarterbacks, one for one quarterback leagues, and he's 30% rostered. But and this will probably not be well received. I think the Raiders are going to give Pittsburgh a lot of trouble this week. And I think Jimmy Garoppolo is probably going to like the Steelers pass rush is fantastic, but they're getting rid of the ball so quick. That's what McDaniels does. That's what Jimmy Garoppolo does. Steelers on a short week traveling to Vegas to face this hungry Raiders team. I wouldn't mind streaming Jimmy Garoppolo in a pinch. And then in a 2-quarterback league, go add Gardner Minshew. We all hope that Anthony Richardson gets out of the concussion protocol and starts this week. But Minshew looked serviceable once again.
Yeah, I think those are both good calls. I had Garoppolo as a streamer for this week.
Fantastic. Just 2 really, really low rostered tight ends, maybe only for your tight end premium leagues. But I'm really excited. And I want to know how you feel about this because it's always that he's getting the work that we want versus the production. Jake Ferguson has 7 red zone targets in the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He's also been almost as bad as Kadarius Toney in terms of like what he's done when they've actually thrown him the ball. He may be even worse. And Luke Schoonmaker, who was a guy I liked quite a bit coming out and then struggled with injuries all off season, scored his first touchdown. He's 2% roster. I think he was early in the process, maybe a 3rd round rookie pick. And then when he couldn't even get to practice, he kind of fell off the radar. I want to go back and make sure that he's rostered in my deeper dynasty leagues because I do think that Ferguson's handle on that tight end 1 role might not be that strong.
Yeah, they've been letting Peyton Hendershot play quite a bit. Ferguson hasn't played quite as much as I thought, and that's not only affected by the blowouts. Even during the first half, his route involvement rate has been lower than I expected. So it's possible that somebody creeps in there because, like you said, he's struggled a little bit, been a little inconsistent. Yeah.
And then I guess Durham Smythe had 8 targets in week 1. He caught 3 passes against the Patriots, who don't ever give up anything to tight ends.
Yeah.
Jalen Waddle doesn't seem to be fully healthy at all. He might be an okay stream.
Definitely. Tight end premium leagues, definitely grab him. He doesn't come off the field. He's played 100% of the snaps. So, yeah.
Confirmed better than Mike Gesicki?
No.
No. We're never giving up on Mike Gesicki. Maybe Arthur Smith can trade for Gesicki next year and play him over Kyle Pitts. Let's take another short break. We'll get to some of my risers and fallers. Jacob sent in some names as well after week 2. So we are going to do risers and fallers, but there's 2 wide receivers, and these guys I think mostly are rising. Devonta Smith rose a little bit for me this week. Tank Dell and Nico Collins both rising. 2 wide receiver duos here where I have a hard time figuring out who to rank higher. AJ Brown's been ranked higher by the community than Devonta Smith by a decent margin for most of the last year. I've kind of gone back and forth and flip-flopped those guys. You look at the last 17 games, 17, including the playoffs, so a full season, Devonta Smith's actually scored slightly more fantasy points than AJ Brown. He's obviously off to a very fast start here, and he's about a year and a half younger than Brown. Do you think at Smith and Brown that gap is shrinking, or would you maybe I think right now I'd prefer Smith.
Yeah, that gap is definitely shrinking. Really, I think the only reason to have Brown higher at this point is that he's shown like true wide receiver 1 alpha target dominance at several stops along the way. We haven't seen that from Devonta yet, but we did see it in college. And like, really, can you blame him for not being a target hog at this point in his career with the circumstances he's had? I think I wouldn't blame anyone for preferring Devonta Smith. I think what we've seen from him is incredibly exciting. Wrote about him a lot this offseason because he, from year 1 to year 2, drastically improved versus man and press coverage. And that's really, really exciting signal when you see that from a young receiver. And yeah, you just watch him. The dude is so freaking good. He's always open. He just glides out there. No one can cover him.
Those guys are both top 12 wide receivers. The next duo, not quite that high, but rising. Nico Collins and Tank Dell. You'd sent in Tank as one of your risers. I know you were big on Nico this offseason. It's been a fantastic start for him. I think Nico, again, about a year and a half older than Tank Dell. I think profile-wise, and I know height's a problem, but like I see more upside with Dell if he overcomes the height concern. I think he has more elite traits than Nico Collins does, but Collins is the wide receiver 1 right now. Do you have these two close in your dynasty rankings?
Yeah, Dell is sneaking up on Nico. They're both going up the rankings. I like both players quite a bit. Tank Dell, man, he led all of college football in receiving over the past 2 seasons. His per route data is insane. He can win all over the field at different levels, and he's like Devonta Smith, and we're seeing this now where Tutu Atwell, we're seeing smaller receivers be able to get on the field and survive and also win. And like Tank Dell is just, he moves differently, man. He's so smooth. He's electric, and cornerbacks can't keep up with him. We saw him just absolutely dominating during the preseason as well. And then he comes out here. I think this is an interesting list. It's the percentage of their team's receiving yards that each rookie has accounted for. Do you want me to go through all of it?
Yes. Yeah, I saw this on Twitter, and I'd like to definitely do it.
So this is while these players are on the field, only accounting for the plays that they have played. Puka Nacua at the top has 45% of the Rams receiving yards when he's been on the field. Then Jaden Reed from Green Bay, 42%. Jalen Hyatt, 40%, super small sample size, but that's exciting. 37% Zay Flowers, 29% Jahmyr Gibbs, 27% Bijan Robinson, 27% Roshan Johnson, 26% Jordan Addison, 25% Tank Dell. So that's a great range to be in there. 22% Sam Laporta, 21% Jackson Smith and Jigba, 21% Luke Musgrave, 20% Josh Downs.
Now go ahead and give the 18 snap sample size of the guy that you left off the list.
Is this Rashee Rice or Marvin Mims? Rashee Rice?
Rashee Rice.
Rashee Rice has played 18. He's run 18 routes, and he has 46% of the Chiefs' targets and 75% of the receiving yards on those plays.
Did his snap share actually go down last week?
Yeah.
That was so strange. He had such a good first half week 1, completely disappeared from the game plan in the second half of week 1. And then I barely saw him on the field in week 2.
I think they just have him as a package player right now. And because Kelsey was out, they had more of those plays that involved his packages because they needed somebody to catch and run. I think they've got their clear starters in Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Sky Moore. And then Kadarius Toney is kind of ahead of him on those package plays. But I think we're going to see him get a lot more involved as the year goes on.
So you would rank those 3 Chiefs in Dynasty: Rice, Toney, Moore?
Yeah. I've been out on Sky the whole time. I just don't see it, man.
They're all around wide receiver 50-ish for me. I think I currently have it Toney, Moore, Rice, but it's hard to have a strong feeling about any of those guys. I don't understand. It almost seems like Patrick Mahomes is a really big fan of Kadarius Toney and Andy Reid is not. Because if Toney's on the field, that's where Mahomes is looking. But he can't play more than 20 snaps a game.
Yeah, Toney just gets peppered with targets. His target per route run rate is insane. And on the opposite end of that, we have Sky Moore with an 11% target per route run rate. It's really, really hard to be productive when you only get targeted on 1/10 of your routes and your average depth of target's like 6 yards.
That's not a good profile. Although that average depth of target got helped by the deep shot, I guess. And we'll see if one of these guys, it's really, and I think it has to do with what you said about Tank Dell as well. Because I think this defensive change has opened the door to guys like him. It's the too high, it's the shell coverage. It's taking away a lot of the stuff we saw Mahomes and Josh Allen and Burrow do so well 2 or 3 years ago. And when defenses are playing like that, it is easier to get the smaller, shiftier guys on the field. You don't necessarily need somebody to do what George Pickens does and run down the sideline and win 50-50 balls, because it's not 50-50. It's 33-33-33 by the time the ball gets there because there's so many defenders back there. Let's get to some dynasty risers. Now, you said George Pickens. We already talked about Tank Dell, Jaden Reed, and Tyjae Spears. You were encouraged by last night. And I understand that completely. What do you view Pickens like a number 3 dynasty wide receiver?
Yeah, and I think that's much lower than most people have him for
Right.
Dynasty. I've been super worried about him given the usage so far. And last night, I don't have the first read target data. Just looking at the routes that he ran, they did use him on slants 27% of the time after not running a single slant in week 1. Let me pull up his slant rate last year. Probably was not high. 4% of his routes last year. So that's different. That's really the only change they made. He still ran a ton of go routes. He still ran a ton of corner and post routes. So that's kind of interesting, but it also, that's a pretty simple route. It's not like he was working in any sort of nuanced way, given just a
Right.
quick look at the route tree last night.
Yeah, that's George Pickens, and I've got him, I think, at wide receiver 31 or 30 in Dynasty. He and Quentin Johnston are kind of back to back, and right now I would take Pickens first, but it wouldn't take much for Johnston to pass him. Jaden Reed, I've been really impressed what he's done, and he's another one I think we could do the teammate thing with. Would you rather in Dynasty Jaden Reed or Romeo Doubs?
Oh, easily Reed. It's been Reed from the get-go for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love Reed's profile. Dobbs, I think, can be a decent real-life player, but he's not someone who's ever drawn targets at a high rate, even in college. He just doesn't, the way that he plays doesn't profile as a fantasy relevant guy.
So Reed doing some downfield stuff. What do you think their distribution of routes looks like when Christian Watson's back? Who's functioning in the short area of the field? Who's got the high A dot in that offense?
I think Dobbs and Watson are working deep, but Reed can do it as well. I don't think that the offense in terms of what Dobbs and Reed are doing right now is going to change hardly at all.
Yeah.
I think Watson just kind of fills that Dontavian Wicks role much more effectively. And then they have a few package design plays for Watson as well, just getting the ball in his hands on quick looks. But one of the things I've been most excited about with Jaden Reed so far is the fact, and this maybe seems counterintuitive, but he's playing only in 3 receiver sets. And so his role is not going to change when Watson gets back.
Right.
It's not like he's benefiting from Watson's absence in terms of like getting more snaps or anything like that. And the other reason that this is exciting that he's done this work in 3 receiver sets. I did this research this offseason. In 3 receiver sets, you're much less likely to draw a target, and your yard per route run rate efficiency goes down as well. I think this makes sense just, anecdotally, like if there's only 2 wide receivers on the field, you're only competing with one other target earner, presumably, assuming the tight ends and running backs aren't, significant target earners. And so the fact that Jaden Reed, even while only running in 3 receiver sets, which typically lower target per route run rate, is still 3rd in the entire NFL in target per route run rate, behind only Puka Nacua and Tyreek Hill. I think that is really, really exciting and has me really bullish on his long-term outlook.
Do you think there's a chance by midseason that we see Reed on the field for 2 wide receiver sets and Romeo Doubs is the guy only playing in 3?
I hope so. I think that would require Christian Watson to prove to Green Bay that he can be the X receiver.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that Reed's going to be the X receiver. I think if he's on the field in 2 receiver sets, he profiles as the flanker. And so, yeah, we haven't seen that from Watson really to this point. I think that they trust Dobbs in that role. And so I think it's unlikely.
Okay. So Reed probably still going to be like a 60% snap guy for most of the year.
Yeah, I think Reed, I don't want to get people too excited with the data. I think it's unlikely that this year he's going to be very relevant in fantasy. I think what we've seen so far is about the best case outcome in terms of production with the role that he's playing. And I don't think the role is going to change a whole lot.
Jaden Reed or Tank Dell?
That's really tough. I liked Jaden Reed more as a player, as a profile. I had him ranked higher going into the year, but I did like Tank Dell. And part of the reason you had to hedge a little bit with Tank Dell just because his profile is so unique. We haven't seen players succeed at this size. But now that we've seen him succeed on some level, at least, that's encouraging and opens the door for him to move up. And also, he has the potential to be an every down player in this offense. We saw in week 2, I don't know. I've been trying to find answers on this, but Nico Collins was 3rd on the Texans in routes run, and Tank Dell was just behind Robert Woods. He ran 44 routes, 47 for Robert Woods. So even in week 1, you said we needed the injury to Noah Brown to get him on the field, but he actually played, I think, close to 50% of snaps in week 1. They just rotated him in quite a bit, which I thought was really encouraging. So, and this week, John Mechie came back, and I was like, I wonder if they're going to split it between him and Mechie, but no, it was like all Tank Dell. And so they clearly trust them. So yeah, there's upside for Tank Dell to like really run away with it this year, which I don't think really exists for Reed, barring an injury to Romeo Doubs.
Yeah, I could see a situation where Tank Dell becomes CJ Stroud's number 1 wide receiver maybe for half of a season. I don't know that Jaden Reed's going to be anybody's number 1 wide receiver. I've got 3 risers here. Kirk Cousins, not somebody I expected to be talking about ever again as a dynasty riser. He was QB 22 for me. He's QB 20 now, but I do think, and I don't know if you've kind of had this light bulb or if you were already there. I think he might lead the league in passing.
Yeah.
And the touchdown misfortune from last year, I'm not expecting to continue into this year. And so he's probably going to throw 35 touchdown passes. I'm not so sure. I mean, I did the projections, the first run for this week at home against the Chargers with an over-under of 54. Kirk Cousins was my QB1. I'm not going to rank him quite that high. But I think this is a guy, if you're a contender and you're just kind of eking it out at quarterback, I don't know that he's just what he's usually been, a low-end number 1 quarterback. He might actually be a difference maker. He might throw for 5,000 yards this year.
Love that. Yeah. Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith, and Jared Goff are 3 guys that they all fit into a similar archetype where like they're left for dead for dynasty purposes, but like those guys could easily be top 10 quarterbacks this year if their defenses struggle and they get into these shootouts. They've got amazing weapons around them and offenses that will likely, center around the pass if they're in neutral game scripts. So yeah, I think that's a great call.
I had Brian Robinson and Kyron Williams back-to-back coming into this week at RB32 and RB33. Both of them moved up this week. That was obviously before I knew Cam Akers was going to be inactive and then on the trade block. Of course, I think people should remember that Cam Akers being inactive and on the trade block does not mean that he won't be the RB1 at the end of the year because he was inactive and on the trade block last year. Now I've got Robinson RB23. I've been really impressed with his usage in the passing game, and it seems like Antonio Gibson is just almost completely in the doghouse. Robinson might just be a feature back. He won't keep scoring touchdowns like this, but might be a feature back. And then Kyron Williams, RB26. Do you prefer Robinson or Williams, and are you moving these guys up?
I am hesitant to move them up very aggressively in Dynasty. I think the setup that we've seen for each of them in the first 2 games is pretty much ideal. We hit on it with Puka Nacua. The Rams have run a ton of plays, and they've been behind. And so it's just been a good setup for Kyron to really be involved. And then on the opposite side of that, we see Washington has played with a lead and really been able to lean on Robinson. And they've got some games coming up where that's not going to be the case probably. So I want to see what it's going to look like going forward and not be too reactionary to what we've seen. But both guys have played better than I would have expected. Robinson particularly. Robinson has avoided 10 tackles through 2 games, which is 6th in the NFL, I think. That's a big improvement from what we saw last year. And I think it's entirely possible that he'll be better than we saw last year because it took him some time to probably get up to speed after getting shot in the leg. He also has accounted for over 75% of the running back rush attempts in both games, which he didn't do in a single game last year. So both of those things are pretty dang exciting.
And the running back position is a complete and total dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Right now. And that's the thing is it feels too high to me to have them in that RB25 range, but I don't have 25 running backs that I feel really good about. Like a guy who's been in that range for a while has been AJ Dillon because I just kept thinking that, Aaron Jones is getting older. AJ Dillon's going to get a chance and he's going to be awesome. I'm not sure AJ Dillon's any good anymore.
Yeah, both those guys over Dillon for sure. What do you think about Isaiah Pacheco? I want to get your Chiefs insight. The role that we've seen him play recently is really exciting. If you want to talk about running back rush share, his has been higher than it's ever been. He's run more routes than any running back on the Chiefs each of the past 2 weeks, which is also exciting. He's been more involved in the red zone than normal. So he's getting some of this work that went to McKinnon last year. I think just draft capital wise, it's hard to move him ahead of Robinson for Dynasty, but how do you compare him and Kyron?
See, I had him at 31 last week, so he was a spot ahead of these 2 guys, and they've both moved ahead of him. He's still at 31. A couple of guys moved behind him as well. This is another one of those situations where how much do you care about the share of the running back rush attempts if it means he's going to run the ball 10 to 13 times per game?
True.
Like,
Yeah.
that's just not that. And I don't really believe, and this could be wrong, like McKinnon hasn't looked like he's still the same guy. But I don't really believe that when we get to November and December, Pacheco is going to be running more routes than Jerick McKinnon. I expected them to open the season with McKinnon in bubble rep and use him more as the season goes on, which is kind of what they've done the last 2 seasons. So I'm pretty skeptical on Pacheco. The one guy, and we've talked about this a lot on this show, you and I, the last 6 months, those day 3 or UDFA running backs who surprise as rookies, and generally the best thing you can do is go sell them. And I really pushed back against that with only one guy. I was on board with that with Pacheco for sure. Like, go sell him if you can. Go sell Algier if you can. I thought Dameon Pierce was the guy who was different. And man, does that look like a complete disaster the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, the offensive line has been a complete disaster. I don't think anything about Dameon Pierce has changed. I think Dameon Pierce is the truth, and I remain bullish.
Why isn't he
on it.
playing more? Why are they playing Mike Boone and Dario Gumbawale 30% of the snaps?
I think because the offensive line is a disaster, and they must prefer those guys as blockers, or they want them out there as quick checkdowns. I'm not really sure. I've been surprised by that. I'm definitely concerned about Dameon Pierce. I'm not just ignoring what's going on. But I think we will see, hopefully, things turn around as the line gets a little bit healthier and they just kind of get things figured out there a little bit. I wanted to bring on Roschon Johnson. How does he compare to the 2 guys we're talking about here for you?
He is just a little bit behind those guys for me.
But definitely has the potential to move ahead if he starts taking more work. Yeah.
I think
He's
that's the whole
so
thing.
Good.
And it's always like he has looked good in that complementary role. And it's, do the Bears want to give him 15 carries in a game ever? Because I think if he got that type of workload, then yeah, I could see him jumping these guys for sure. He looks really good. I'm not sure that the Bears or anybody else will view him as a full-time running back. But you don't have to try very hard to convince me that he's better than Khalil Herbert. I think he's definitely better as a pass catcher, and as a blocker. So Dynasty Fallers, here's one that's no fun at all. Justin Fields.
My gosh.
Make me feel better about this, because the first 2 weeks have looked like I tweeted about this Sunday and I hinted at it last week, but I'm sure you've watched Anthony Richardson and Justin Fields this year. I think Richardson looks a lot more comfortable in the pocket.
Yeah, I'm not the guy to make you feel better about Justin Fields. I'm sorry. I really enjoy the work of JT. Oh man, I'm blanking on his name. The Quarterback School. You can find him on Twitter. His YouTube channel is phenomenal. He's documented Justin Fields and the Bears' dysfunction and just complete panic and struggle for every step along the way. In the preseason, it was a complete disaster. It was rough last year, and it's been worse this year. He truly feels panicked back there. He doesn't trust the system. He doesn't trust the line. I want no part of it.
See, I've dropped him to QB8, and I don't think it's far enough. But it's still, I do have a hope, because what they're doing right now makes sense to me. If the plan for this year was, let's find out if Justin Fields can play quarterback without using his legs, and then we can bring the legs back into it. But let's see. We got to find out this year if we've got a quarterback or not. And so far, it doesn't look like it. But I don't think we would have this same concern if Shane Steichen had been his coach the past 2 or 3 years. I think there's a possibility that week 4, week 5, the Bears say, okay, scrap that. Let's do what we were doing in the second half of last year.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I've got him at QB9, and I'm looking at it now. I think I could easily move Stroud ahead of him and Bryce Young as well. Young has struggled, but man, it could not get worse than the setup he's got in Carolina. And I think Stroud has looked really good. Yeah.
Where do you have Tua ahead of him then?
I don't. Wow. Yeah. Tua would be ahead of him at this point. Yeah. I missed him. So yeah, QB10 is where I would have Fields right now.
And then it might be 3 weeks and Kyler Murray's back and Kyler Murray's ahead of him. I feel really bad about the way things look for Justin Fields. And some of it I think is like, he's not improved at the things that we really needed him to improve on. And some of it is they're not giving him any help.
No.
Like the way they're structuring this offense, I just don't think is going to work with him. George Kittle was tight end 7, fell to tight end 9. There's not a lot of big movers at tight end this week for me, but are you getting concerned at all that we've are done seeing George Kittle as a number 1 tight end?
Brother, I've been concerned. I had George Kittle ranked as a tight end 12 going into the year for Dynasty.
Yeah.
Yeah, his per route rates have gotten progressively worse for like 4 years. This is just not what you want to see from an aging profile, especially one who's had so many injuries over the years. No, yeah.
So that makes it to where Debo and Brandon Ayuk can both be top 24 wide receivers.
I think so. Yeah, that's part of it. Is like I am like full send on Brandon Ayuk being a superstar. Like I think he's ascending. He had a bad week last week because he really got hit hard. It was clearly shaken up. But I think he's taking over there, and it's tough for Kittle with those two and Christian McCaffrey.
Rondale Moore, another guy I was just too high on. I've dropped him to wide receiver 54 now. It's been a terrible start to the year. Are there any of the under 10% rostered running backs that we talked about that you would drop Rondale Moore for in Dynasty?
I don't think so, unless you really needed to start one right now. Then I guess I could see it. I'm pretty much all the way out on Rondale as well. When I saw this preseason, they weren't letting him play in anything but 3 receiver sets. Like, they tried to play him on the perimeter last year and just did not work at all. We've never seen him be anything other than a gadgety guy.
Right.
And then this year, he's a total afterthought. He's been targeted on 10% of his routes, like Sky Moore. We said that that recipe doesn't work for Sky Moore with an average depth of target of 6 yards. Like, Rondale's is 1 yard. And
right.
So like, no, thank you.
So you had a couple of other Moores on your followers, DJ Moore and Sky Moore. I know DJ's the best, but would you can only hold on to one this week. You've got somebody you need to add to your roster. Would you rather have Sky or Rondale?
I'd rather have Sky.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's playing in a better offense. He's potentially able to work down the field. Matt Harmon has been cautiously optimistic about what he saw from Sky. He thinks that he can win. But yeah, I think it's over for Rondale, honestly.
Let's bring another Moore into this discussion, because I've dropped DJ Moore so much in the last year. Thankfully, I haven't dropped him in any leagues, but in Dynasty rankings for sure. He only went down 1 spot in the last week. But there's another Moore we haven't talked about, who hasn't really done much this year either, Elijah Moore. So Elijah Moore or DJ Moore in your Dynasty rankings?
This is such a depressing conversation, man. You and I have been like 2 of the people just like pounding the table, like DJ Moore is good. Yeah, I think that DJ Moore is still the answer. I'm curious. He's not that much older than Elijah Moore, right?
I think he's 3 years older, 2.5 at least.
Older?
Yeah.
And he, I think, has the potential to be the wide receiver 1 still. Like this year, It could happen. Yeah, he's 3 years older. Good call. Man, that's really brutal. I think they're pretty much interchangeable, honestly. Sorry to give such a weak answer.
Can I change one of my Dynasty team names to More is Less with the last name Moore? Because good gosh.
Yeah, it's rough. I liked all these guys. I was pretty excited about all these guys like a couple years ago.
Right. Yes. Last one on your losers list, and I didn't even mention him. I moved him down for sure. I got to look to see how far he's fallen. But Alec Pierce, a really bad start to the year for him as well. I think he's behind all the Moores for me.
Yeah, I would have him ahead of Rondo. But it's been brutal for Alec Pierce. He looks like he might not be in the league for much longer, which seems insane for a 2nd-round pick. He's trying to target on 7% of his routes this year. He was completely invisible during the preseason. They really like Josh Downs, and he's looked really good. So they've got 3 potentially pass catchers there. If one of Jelani Woods or Kylan Granson emerges, they're ahead of Pierce. I just don't think there's going to be any volume for him. And he's been really inefficient. And also with the types of routes that he runs, he's kind of like George Pickens, where he's just doing downfield stuff and just not ever getting anything for fantasy. It's rough. I wouldn't
So
want to bail completely just because he is young and like he was a project, I think, coming in a little bit. So yeah, ahead of Rondale.
but behind Sky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's finish it off on a more positive note. We've got some Puka tweets from early this morning that I received in the inbox, and this one's just Puka adjacent. Would you try to trade for Cooper Kupp, or are you concerned with what Puka's doing that he won't have as much target share?
That is really interesting. I could see it if you could get Kupp at a reasonable price and you're like clearly a win now team. I love, trying to go after these guys at a discount, like elite players in Dynasty. When you have news like this, I went and traded for Jonathan Taylor in a few spots, even though I don't necessarily love his profile. And Kupp was somebody I was looking into as well. But the hamstring scares me, and the way that they've talked about it scares me. It could be really rough if you give real assets for him to be like your win now piece, and then he just doesn't come back.
Yeah, I've got a couple of those rosters, and I'll tell you, you can grade my trade because it's not the type of trade that is you generally want to be making in Dynasty. But I'm a contender, 2-0, top scoring team in the league, very little wide receiver depth. I traded Tank Dell and Sam Laporta. I received Mike Evans and DeAndre Hopkins.
Huh.
Like, you hate it, but at the same time, it might be a pair of top 20 wide receivers.
Yeah. I'm a little bit worried that Hopkins is gassed. Like, he has not looked good. And then now trying to play through this ankle injury, I hate that for him. But on the other end of that, Mike Evans has looked great.
Right.
He's demanding targets like we've never seen before. Like, he looks rejuvenated. Like, I think I could see it, Heath. You're gonna get killed if you post that trade on Twitter by Dynasty people, but I could see it with the team setup.
Right. So one more Puka question. What running back should I be targeting if I'm trying to sell high on Puka? Is it even possible to sell high on Puka? No, we've established that it is. Jacob is open to it. Your running back situations, and this is a very realistic situation. I think there's a lot of people probably have 5 wide receivers that they were planning on starting above Puka, and they've lost 3 running backs in the first 2 weeks of the season. They need to go get running back help. Who are you trying to trade Puka for?
Yeah, obviously these questions are kind of hard to answer in a vacuum, but if you have a team that is more long-term, like a team that has Josh Jacobs or has Jonathan Taylor or has Saquon Barkley or someone like that has more of a long-term outlook, then maybe you can trade Puka in a pick or something like that for one of those guys.
Jacobs was the first guy that came to my mind. Like, I thought his value is, I guess it's fallen in people's. It's so weird with guys like Jacobs and Joe Mixon and Miles Sanders who have just been terribly inefficient, but they're not hurt and they're still getting all the touches. So
Jacobs has -8 yards before contact through 2 games. He has 46 rushing yards and 54 of them have come after contact through 2 games. It's been
I bet that gets better against the Steelers this week.
Yeah, it's been as bad as it could get. I don't know if it will get much better against the Steelers, hopefully. Yeah, so I think he's somebody who's been undervalued, just kind of perpetually undervalued by the Dynasty community, by the fantasy community at large. And so to see him struggle early, you might be able to get him cheap. I think if you believe in Dameon Pierce, you could do that. If you want to take a shot on Jahmyr Gibbs, he's somebody we mentioned, you might be able to do that. It depends. If you've got somebody who's a bit reactionary to what's going on right now, then and they have Jahmyr Gibbs and they see what Puka Nacua is doing, it sounds absurd.
You might, especially after week 3. Again,
yeah,
we get a 15 carry Craig Reynolds game where Reynolds scores the team's touchdown. I think it's absolutely possible you could trade Puka for Jahmyr Gibbs.
That's so wild. What a world.
Last one I'll ask you, and this was a legitimate question I received, and I want you to think about it before you laugh or react. It's kind of sad too. Puka or Kyle Pitts in Dynasty?
I don't want to think about that. Oh God.
It's still Pitts, right?
Right? Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still Pitts. Stop it.
I will guarantee you, if I put that poll on Twitter, Puka's going to win like 80
like
20.
70-30. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Absolutely. It's been, congratulations. Happy Puka Nacua Day. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I know that I certainly have. We'll be right back here next week. We will talk to you next Tuesday.